We know it's been a little while since our last show due to winter break. Just to quickly catch you up, here's a few things that happened in the Philadelphia sports world over the last month. Jalen Hurts got hurt, and it felt like the sky was falling until the Eagles clinched the 1 seed and now are going to be playing in the NFC Championship game. The Sixers have gone 19-4 in their last 23 games, are in the 2nd seed, and the Flyers actually don't look too bad. Oh yeah, the Dallas Cowboys ran this bizarre play and ended up losing in the divisional round, which is pretty on brand for them over the last 30 years. You're watching Sports Talk Philadelphia. Welcome back to Sports Talk Philadelphia. As always, I'm your host, Aidan. Today I'm joined by the same panel I usually am with Shane Nolan. Shane, how are you doing?
Good. Feels good to be back.
Yeah, Mike, how are you doing?
Good. Eagles win, Cowboys lose. Nothing better.
You know, that made it a very good week. On top of the Eagles beating their divisional rival Giants, who they, by the way, demolished Saturday night. They ended up winning 38-7 over the Giants. Jalen Hurts had a pretty good game, 16 of 24. 3 total TDs, though. They got off to such a fast start. He didn't even really need to throw the ball after the first quarter. Devontae Smith still had a decent game, 6 receptions, 61 yards, and a touchdown. Goddard also got a touchdown. So just a great offensive game for the Eagles, especially with Jalen Hurts. Mike, what was your thought about Jalen Hurts' play throughout this game?
Yeah, I thought he looked great. I mean, he's only had 1 playoff game, and that was last year. And in his first year, he didn't look good. But this year, he was ready. He came to play. And like you said, they got off to a start early that they didn't really need to rely on him as much, but he still looked great, and I'm excited to see what he can do in this game against a much better defense than what he saw against the Giants. But yeah, the offense was clicking, and there was some doubt with his injury, but they're not going to say it, but it looked fine. But I'm sure he's hurting, so hopefully that doesn't affect him too much next week.
Yeah, no, 100%. It is good to see that he looked much more healthier, that he was running ball. The one biggest problem offensively wasn't even a problem. It was just sort of something that happened in the game. A.J. Brown only had 3 receptions for 22 yards. There seemed to be some sort of conversation between him and the coaching staff. He was obviously frustrated. He wasn't getting more targets, felt like he could have been more productive, said that it just came down to the fact that he feels he's a big-time receiver, wants more receptions and targets for playoff games. Mike, what was your thought on this whole situation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too worried about it. I mean, when he's one of the best receivers in the league, and when you don't get the ball, you're going to be frustrated a little bit, especially in a playoff game. You want to show off in prime time. And he didn't get the ball much, but I don't think it's anything to really worry about. Him and Jalen Hurts have had both career years, and Hurts is only 2nd year, but they both just elevated each other, and I'm not too worried about the chemistry. I think, they'll bounce back right next week, but I think it was just, not getting the ball to him. I don't think it was anything that will affect next week.
Yeah, it's certainly something that he's complained about before in games and then has been totally fine afterwards, so I agree. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but just something to look out for sure. The one group that did get a lot of touches this game was the running backs. They were very stellar this game. Kenneth Gainwell led the team in yards, which he usually doesn't do. He had 12 carries, 112 yards, and a touchdown. Miles Sanders didn't get a touchdown, but he had 17 carries for 90 yards. And Boston Scott, the giant killer, came up big again. He only had 6 carries for 32 yards, but got that another touchdown. His numbers against the Giants are just unbelievable, the amount of touchdowns he gets. Mike, they ran the ball very, very well this game. What was your thought on this philosophy of running the ball after getting that big lead?
It seems like whenever Boston Scott will play the Giants, that whoever's coaching is kind of just to put it to the Giants, just to give them a touchdown. Give them a chance to score another touchdown, just to add on. But yeah, I like the running game. Looked great. Obviously Miles Sanders is the lead back there, but when you got Kenneth Gainwell and Scott both contributing like they did, it's huge. And with Gainwell, I hope it's more. I hope he can be more like a Corey Clement, how the Eagles had in the Super Bowl run in 2017. So I hope that, they can keep this up against a much better defense in the 49ers.
Yeah, it was certainly interesting game calling to have Nick Sirianni run the ball this late. It should be something a lot of coaches do, but it's a big reason why the Chargers lost their playoff game when they got such a huge lead and then blew it because they were still having Herbert pass so often. So this was very good coaching by Sirianni, in my opinion, and I feel like this could be a huge positive going forward.
Yeah, and especially, when you have, when you're playing, the Giants aren't, they're a playoff team, but they're not the best, they weren't the best playoff team that their Eagles are going to face. And, when you go up early, you can do whatever you want. You can run the ball, pass the ball, but against the 49ers, you're going to have to do, much more and kind of a more dynamic offense than what they saw against the Giants. But, it worked, but hopefully it can, work against a much better defense.
Is something I talked about a lot last year was the Eagles' struggles against stopping running quarterbacks. The defense showed up huge in this game. Had 5 sacks, got also interceptions by James Bradbury, and held the Giants to only 118 rushing yards with a healthy Daniel Jones and a healthy Saquon Barkley. So, Mike, what was your opinion on how the defense did in this game?
Yeah, the defense. I mean, I thought it looked great. I mean, when you hold a team to 7 points, that's you're doing something right. And the defensive line. I don't think you can't even say much about what they've done this year. I mean, 75 sacks between the regular season and playoffs. It's remarkable what they've done. And they've gotten so much with the run defense not being great, and we've gotten on them all last year about it. And they've gotten it together, and they're finally starting to click. And I think the only thing that a lot of Eagles fans are still kind of worried about is Jonathan Gannon, and I think some of the criticism is a little too much, but I do think that especially in a game like next week when you're playing Brock Purdy, you can't just sit back and let him stay in the pocket. So he's going to have to do something different, but I'm confident, but I do like how they played on Saturday.
Yeah, definitely a big talking point for the Eagles this year. Sort of overcoming the coaching in certain ways, especially with the players they have. That was pretty easy to do. But there were still guys that got snubbed for awards. A lot of people thought Brandon Graham was going to win Comeback Player of the Year with his awesome season after tearing his ACL last year. Didn't get nominated. Hassan Reddick probably should have got named for Defensive Player of the Year. Didn't get nominated. Is this motivation for the Eagles coming into this week? Because it sort of feels like that this defense is going to be poised to have a huge game after getting snubbed for these awards.
And I think, that and just hearing all the talk, Brock Purdy, being this, next big thing, and just how good the 49ers are, and they're going to come into Philly and just, stomp all over the Eagles defense. And I think that's been motivation with them. And when you play in Philly, you're always going to have that little added pressure. So I think that's just motivation itself. But I think they are motivated and will be ready to play on Sunday. Yeah,
it's definitely a lot of what happens in the playoffs is motivation. There's motivation for Jalen Hurts being told that maybe he's not supposed to be that next big quarterback. There's a lot of talk about the running backs not being productive before. Miles Sanders always being hurt, now they're healthy. It almost feels parallel to 2017 in certain ways when it comes to that.
Yeah, and it does. And I think the one big difference is at least we have our starting quarterback, which is a huge difference. But yeah, you're right. With the injuries and just people counting them out, us being the 1 seed, coming into the playoffs, not looking too hot, and everybody doubting us. And I think they did what they needed to do on Saturday and kind of make a statement game, because I think if they just won that game by 10 points, 10, 15 points, people will be talking about us getting crushed against the 49ers this week. So I think they did what they had to do, and I think it will be a lot of momentum going into Sunday against the Niners.
So the Eagles will be playing the 49ers on Sunday for the NFC Championship. It's a Niners team that's had a very interesting playoff run. They've won both games, really struggled against Seattle in the first half of the wild-card game. They got away with a huge win, beat Dallas by only a touchdown. But Brock Purdy is 7-0 as a starter in the NFL. As a rookie, was Mr. Relevant, the last pick of the draft. He's been very, very good. And the 49ers' last loss was in Week 7 to Kansas City, who's also in a championship on the AFC side. So, Mike, this is a very good 49ers team. What do the Eagles have to do to win?
Like I said earlier, you can't let Brock Purdy just sit there and dot you up. I mean, with Purdy, he's been good, but he has not really won them games. The defense has been great. He's got a good supporting cast. He's been doing what he's needed to do. He's not turning the ball over, but he hasn't been the reason why they've won games. And I think if they just whenever you're in a conference game, you're going to play good teams, but they got to get to him. Gannon can't just sit back. If he starts off hot 5 for 5 and you're in a zone, you can't, you got to bring that blitz. You can't let them get off early. So it's going to be tough, but he is a rookie quarterback. He was Mr. Irrelevant for a reason. I'm not saying he can't be good, but it's the atmosphere he's going to be playing is going to be, nothing like he's played in before.
So personally, I feel pretty confident about the offense. I don't really have any questions about them. My biggest question still is on the defensive side. Obviously, the 49ers have a lot of weapons. Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey. I think the biggest one's going to be George Kittle. I don't know how you game plan against this guy, and I don't have too much trust in my linebackers. Do you think that there's any way the Eagles can slow this guy down?
I think it's just going to have to be getting to Purdy and not even letting him get a throw off. I mean, and that's what I'm kind of worried about with Gannon. He's been good, but we've seen it before where he just lets some of these pocket quarterbacks just sit back there and just get all the yards you can. And it could work, but they can't let them do that. They have to be, they have to send pressure, and they can't just let him sit back there. So it'll be interesting to see what he does and if he listens to all the criticism.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a game that's going to come down to defense. Whoever comes up with the big play is most likely going to win. We're not going to go to another team that is having an awesome season after a really rough start in the 76ers. Like I said in the opener, they've won 19 of their last 23 games after starting off 12-12. They're now the second seed in the East, but they had an awesome road trip the last week. They went 5-0 against some very competitive teams in the West, came back home after that long road trip, and just played a very competitive game against the Nets. It was one that they were smoking them for a while, and then they came away with a close win, 137-133, and beat out an awesome game, 26 points, 10 rebounds. Maxey played well, got 27 points, 5 assists. Harden also got over 20 points. This team's just looking like it gelled, especially in this Nets win. It's a game where the Sixers got off to a fast start, gave up the lead a little bit. It's usually one that the Sixers would lose in most recent years, and they won this one. So this is just, it feels like a very different Sixers team than past ones.
Yeah, it does. And I think it goes back to kind of what they added in the offseason, and also just James Harden. He really, he got them the win at the end of the game. He made big baskets, and that's what we kind of expected when we got him. Embiid last night, I think the emotions of playing Simmons for the first time was kind of getting to him. He had 26 points, but he was, I think, 6 for 18. Just not a great offensive night. And like I said, I think it was the Simmons thing. But this team, it all rides on Embiid and what he can do. So they need him towards the end of the year. But I liked what I saw. Maxey just continues to get better. And, I do like the bench pieces we have. So I do like how this team is looking.
Yeah, I was going to mention Ben Simmons. Obviously, he was part of that huge blockbuster trade last year with the Nets. First time playing against Embiid. Simmons really struggled. He only scored 10 points, and all of them came in the third quarter. Didn't play at all pretty much in the fourth quarter. There was a lot of boos. It was a very passionate crowd, and it's a crowd that you hope will still be supporting the Sixers all the way through into the playoffs, because that's been a huge factor for why the Sixers do so well in the regular season, is because of that crowd.
Yeah, and that's why, the regular season, I know it's 82 games, the long season, but these games are important because, getting that home court in the playoffs is huge. And I don't know if they'll get the 1 seed, but even if they get this 2 seed in that 2-3 matchup, getting the home court against, Bucks, Nets, either one of those is huge. So you're right, the home court's huge, and they just got to continue to rack up these wins in the regular season.
Yeah, racking up those wins is not something the Sixers have really had a problem with. They're 31-16, second in the East after being around the 5th, 6th for a while. Only 3 games behind the Celtics, who got off to a really hard start, slowed down a little bit, but as you see, they're still 21 games over 500. They're a very, very good team. The East is still super competitive. You still got the Bucks. The Nets are going to struggle without Durant, but the Cavs are right there as well. And I think that the Cavs might actually be the most well-rounded team just because of all the depth that they have. So like I said, very super competitive East. How do you see the rest of the season going for the Sixers at this point?
Yeah, like you said, the Cavs, I like too. I think they're going to be a dangerous team come playoff time. I don't know if they're contenders yet, but they're close. And Donovan Mitchell has just brought them to a new level. But yeah, the East, there's so many good teams, and I think one team that we shouldn't probably discount right now is the Heat, who are I think in 5th on that graphic, who made the Eastern Conference Finals last year and were the 1 seed, who the Sixers lost to. So I think that's one team to look for. But yeah, it's wide open. But the Sixers, I think they might need to add maybe something at the deadline, but I do like the team they have, and I think they're, set up good to make a run come June, May.
Yeah, and a big part of making that run comes down to coaching. We talked a lot last year about the struggles that Doc Rivers had coaching the Sixers, that they never made it past the Eastern Conference semifinal, never made it to the Eastern Conference final, much less the finals appearance. The coaching this year, especially in the second half of this season so far, has looked much improved. The fact that Rivers is now letting Maxey come off the bench, I think, has been a huge factor for why the Sixers are playing well. He's relying more on the bench, and I feel like this team just looks almost completely different than the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and I'm one of the people who not really a big Doc Rivers fan, but I'll give him credit. He's definitely settled. He's got them going. They're playing well. It wasn't looking good in the beginning of the season, but he's got them playing well. And yeah, I do like Tyrese Maxey coming off the bench. I think that's a great move. But like I said, they've been good in the regular season. It's going to come down to playoffs and what he can do in the playoffs. So hopefully he can, get them finally past the second round. And to me, that will be a success in the season.
Yeah, I mean, we all hope for a finals appearance, but we've got to be realistic. The East is super stacked. Just making it to the conference finals with the health of talent has been would be a huge plus for Sixers fans after everything that Sixers fans have gone through in the most recent years. Sixers' upcoming games is going to be a bit of a struggle. They've got the Nuggets this weekend. It's going to be a huge rivalry game between Jokic and Embiid, who are both fighting for MVPs again. Jokic is fighting for his 3rd MVP in a row. Embiid's trying to get his first. This game would be huge for that. And then play the Magic in back-to-back games. Shouldn't be too much of a struggle, but you never want to count out any of these teams. What are your expectations for these next 3 games?
Yeah, I mean, the Nuggets game is going to be tough, and I think with Embiid and Jokic they don't play each other a lot because they're in different conferences, but there's definitely a little rivalry there because Jokic beating him out of MVP the last 2 years, but that'll be fun. I can only imagine what like a 7-game finals will look like between them two. I mean, that would be amazing, but yeah, the Magic are better, but the Nuggets game will be good, and that'll be a huge test to see kind of where the Sixers are at against teams in the West.
So last year when these two teams played against each other, Embiid outplayed Jokic, but the Nuggets still won, and I felt like that was a huge factor in Jokic winning MVP. If the Sixers win this game, do you think that will boost MVP's chances by a lot?
Yeah, was that pre-Harden last year? Or
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously that team's much better, and I think that I think Melton, who played great last night, will be a huge reason why they will get to where they need to be. But I think that it's going to come down to Embiid, but also Harden and what does the late game, what he can do late game and just close out games.
Yeah, the Sixers just have a much more talented team this year than last. It's very exciting to see, and hopefully things keep going the way that they are at this point. We're now going to go to the one of the 3 teams that has struggled the most, and they're still not even playing that badly, in the Philadelphia Flyers. The Flyers have won 3 of their last 7 games, which for them is not really that bad. Hart had 31 saves in their wing over the Red Wings, and Kevin Hayes has scored 5 goals in his last 6, albeit 3 of them coming in a hat trick and the other 2 coming in the same game. But still, they're playing much better than we thought. We're now going to go to our Flyers representative, and Shane Nolan. Shane, this season's been a little bit weird. Everyone thought the Flyers would be in last in the East. They aren't, but yet most people are still hoping for a bad draft pick. So what is your feelings on the Flyers season?
I mean, this team is very much the definition of a mediocre team. I mean, in years past, like when they were mediocre, they weren't beating the bad teams, but they were able to beat the good teams and make the playoffs in like a wild card spot. But this year, they are beating the bad teams, but against the really good teams like Boston and Toronto, they are getting heavily outplayed. Like, it is obvious how different the talent level is when they play teams like Boston or Toronto. I mean, they just outskate them, they're faster and everything, and they're just better defensive-wise.
Yeah. Up the Chicago Blackhawks game where they lost 4-1. The Blackhawks are last in the West. It should have been a give-me game for the Flyers, and they couldn't get it done. So it still shows that they have a ways to go.
Yeah, it does. I mean, that game was just bad defensively, in my opinion. It is, like you said, they're last in the Western Conference. That they should have been able to beat that game, especially coming off the Christmas break when they were out on the West Coast and they swept the West Coast strip. And they beat 2 bad teams in the Ducks and Sharks. But then they beat the Kings, who are actually a good playoff team right now. So, yeah, that game was horrible.
Yeah, it's just been a very weird season. Like we just said, it's very bizarre that they're still playing this well, and then we'll just have a clunker game. So you can tell this is a young team that's slightly improving, but we see they have to go long ways. There was a big story that came out over winter break when we had off. John Tortorella decided to get rid of the team iPads off the bench, said that he doesn't care about the criticism that I get for it, used some colorful language in between there. The reason these iPads are used is because the bench players can be able to see what's happened on the play, especially on the line. You want to be able to see if there was a broken play, how to fix it. Tortorella said that they've been a distraction. Shane, what is your opinion on the iPad fiasco?
Anybody who knows John Tortorella, anybody who knows hockey knows that John Tortorella is an old school coach. And I mean, whether the iPads help the players or it doesn't help the players, that's the decision that John Tortorella made. I mean, I kind of agree with him in a sense that when you come off the bench and you're looking at the iPad right away to see what mistake you made or whatever, you're not paying attention to what's happening on the ice right then and there. And I feel like being able to see, getting rid of the iPads makes you pay more attention to the game. It gets you thinking about what you did wrong your last shift, and you're able to see how your teammates are playing live action right now.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense, although I will say there's a different generation of hockey players. Most sports teams professionally use this type of technology. So is there a chance that could hinder the Flyers' success as well?
No, I mean they're just looking at a screen to see what they did wrong or what they did right. I mean, it's not. I don't think it has anything to do with success for any players or anything like that. It's just something to help them.
Yeah, I mean the Flyers, as much as they've struggled in the past, this year they're not too bad. They're 7th in the Metropolitan, which doesn't look great in context, and yet they're only 8 points out of a playoff spot, which is not something that most people that were following the Flyers before the season would have ever picked. So obviously most people are still not going to pick the Flyers to make the playoffs. If they even finished 5 or 6 points out of a playoff spot, would that count as a win for this season?
No, not really in my opinion, because I mean this team lacks depth talent in the minor leagues right now, and they need that high draft pick. I mean, this is a rebuilding year for them. I mean, it's retooling year according to Chuck Fletcher, but they need to start rebuilding from the bottom, from the Phantoms and everything. So to me, it's not a win. They need to get a good top 5 draft pick.
Yeah, that does not look like that's going to happen this year. Unfortunately, they've beaten so many bad teams like the Arizona Coyotes, San Jose Sharks, and even the Anaheim Ducks, which is a team that they were competing for that last spot for. So it does not look like that's going to happen. We're now going to move on to Fast 5. A lot of sports news that happened over the break. Probably the biggest international one was the signing of Cristiano Ronaldo going from Manchester United to Al Nassr in Saudi Arabia. This move is very, very complex, complicated, and it angered a lot of European soccer fans. Before the World Cup, Ronaldo basically forced his way out of Manchester United. He was not happy there. The fans weren't happy with the team's lack of success, and then he moved on. It seemed like that he was going to go to a bigger European team and then got a huge contract from Al Nassr. It seems weird that a star player like this would go to Saudi Arabia, but it makes sense in the context of what Saudi Arabia wants to do. The government there has been very clear that they want to host the World Cup. They've been mentioning a lot of these new developments that they've been doing for their infrastructure, for their Vision 2030, basically having a bunch of new technology, new infrastructure built for that time, and their centerpiece is going to be the World Cup. If you want to host the World Cup and you're not really a soccer country, the best way to do that is to have the best player in the world on your team. So in that way, signing Ronaldo makes sense. Al Nassr will now be a more high-profile team than it was. It'll be interesting to see how much international coverage the team gets after the whole having Ronaldo there. We'll see once he plays first if the coverage will keep up from now. But obviously, this is a huge story, one that will be followed at least for a couple of weeks. We're now going to go back to the United States and to American football with Mike. We talked about the NFC Championship. There is another one, the AFC Championship. And it's a game that could be more interesting than the NFC one with the two teams that played last year. So, Mike, what are your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I'm kind of having a tough time picking it. I mean, I think Burrow has had Mahomes' number, and obviously it's going to come down to Mahomes, his health. Obviously he rolled his ankle last game, but he's been practicing, so it's going to come down to his health. But I think the Bengals they look so good against the Bills, and I think it's going to be tough for me to pick against them right now. So I think I'm going to go with the Bengals, but it's also hard to go against Mahomes too. But it'll kind of hinder on his health. But I think I'm going to have to lean Bengals in this one.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't pick either the Chiefs or Bengals to win this one. I picked the Bills, which was not a great pick looking back. But yeah, like you said, the Bengals just totally destroyed that game, had complete control. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in this game. Mike, we're going to stick with you for more football. The College Football Championship happened a week after New Year's between TCU and Georgia. It mostly felt like Georgia was going to win this game, and they dominated, won 65-7. What were your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I mean, just watching, it's good to have kind of a fresh face, in there. It's not the same, with TCU. It was fresh, but at the same time, we wanted to see a good game, and that just did not happen. That game was over, 5 minutes into it after the first drive. I mean, but, hopefully, it was a good season, good college football year, and I'm looking forward to when they expand the playoffs because I think it will kind of give, the more teams like the TCUs, not the bigger names, an opportunity, and to win other games against and not just go against Georgia, and lose 68-7 in the championship game. So I'm looking forward to the rule changes in the next couple of years.
Going from football to baseball, the biggest signing that happened was Carlos Correa to what was the Giants, and then he didn't get signed there because of issues with his medical records. Then got signed to the Mets, and that ended up falling through because of the fact that he had stuff on his medical records, and then went back to the Twins for a huge contract. So Shane, what is your thought on this entire dilemma that happened with Carlos Correa?
This whole thing was a big roller coaster ride. First with the Giants not wanting him because of the leg injury, then the Mets signing him, and it's like, well, the Giants didn't want him, so why? Or this is going to be a problem for you with the physical. But for the Twins, they really needed this signing because they know Carlos Correa. I mean, he was injured last year, And if he can stay healthy, I think this team can make the playoffs, at least a wild card spot.
It'll definitely be tough for them to fight in that division. It was a very bad one, but the White Sox seem to have it at this point. We're finally going to go to college basketball, where the biggest upset happened last weekend in Temple beating University of Houston in Houston. This game has totally changed the trajectories of both these teams. Houston was the number one team in the country at this point. They now fall to 3 behind Alabama and Purdue. It seems like they're going to have to win out in order to get that one spot back before the tournament. And Temple is now 13-9 after winning 2 straight games since then. They have a huge win to go in their book, in that beating Houston. And it now feels like that they can make at least the NIT if they keep playing this well, and have a chance at making it to the tournament, which would be interesting. So, guys, I don't know if you saw this game at all, but it was certainly an interesting one, and it could make Temple a bubble team going into the tournament.
I mean, Temple's, the past couple of years, they've been on the fringe. So it's a good win for them, good win for their program. So, we'll see kind of how that helps our morale for the rest of the year.
Yeah, it'll also be interesting to see if Houston can get back into that one spot. If they win the AAC, chances are they'll still be a number 1 seed going into the tournament, which is really only 2 months away, or a month and a half. It's really not as far away as it seems. So that's all coming up. A lot of huge sports events, news, Super Bowl, obviously. Starting Major League Baseball is coming up in a month. So we will make sure to have you covered for all of that. But that wraps up this episode of Sports Talk Philadelphia. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching. Obviously, make sure to follow us on social media at Twitter and Instagram at SportsTalk LTV. We hope that you leave thoughts, suggestions, follow the Eagles' run into hopefully a Super Bowl appearance. Like I said, that wraps up this episode. Thanks so much for watching, and make sure to tune in next week.